Hey guys, welcome back to Splints and Whiskey. Sam Patrick here with my good friend John Johnson, sitting on the banks of the Potomac, overlooking the beautiful sights and sounds of Washington, D.C. over here at the AMSUS conference, which is our big federal healthcare collaborative conference that we come to and find friends. So we're on the road this week and doing face-to-face. Sorry, no video because, well, we enjoy the view and we don't have to look at you guys. So
That's true, and you don't have to look at me. So
yeah, fair.
Everybody wins.
You guys know I'm ugly, but whatever. So JJ here, I'll let him introduce himself as he's a legend amongst men, and here you go, my guy.
Well, thanks. I'm amongst men for sure. I don't know if I'm a legend, but not even in my own mind. But so for background purposes, 18 Delta, Special Forces medic for 20 years, most of it in 5th group, and then ended as an education, leader, I guess, if you want to say that, at the JSOMTC. So that's the Joint Special Operations Medical Training Center. I try not to use acronyms without telling you what they are. So lots of deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, some stuff in Turkey here and there, just a couple of different things. Most infamous, I guess, for my experience in Syria, just happened to be the wrong guy at the right time and handled the Manbij offensive, treated 4,000 patients-ish,
No big deal.
In 4 months. And I mean, like, granted, we all would have done it. And I think other people probably would have done it better, but I just happened to be the guy who was there. So I got the experience to do kind of a guerrilla hospital, which was a part that was most interesting to me. But the number of patients that I treated kind of just set me up for some conundrums of life that I didn't expect to experience. I think we'll talk about a lot today. But yeah, I think that's a quick overview of who I am.
Yeah, no big deal. Just treated 4,000 people in like 4 days, bro.
Not 4 days, 4 months, but
okay,
still, like,
months, yeah, I'm not good at mathing.
Yeah, I never do math in public, right? Rule number 1.
I got fingers.
Yeah, and some toes, but I'm wearing shoes, which is a big deal for everybody that knows me. I hate shoes.
As I rolled up and it was 30 degrees, and JJ here was flip flops. But
yeah,
hey,
But I'm amongst a bunch of surgeons, and I'm trying to be semi-professional in my days. So. Yeah. I'm getting there, right?
Fair enough, my guy. All right, well, so here's JJ's background, and as you mentioned, dealing with kind of catastrophic levels of casualties that us in the U.S. military has not seen probably ever. And to be fair, well, not ever. Obviously, I'm sitting next to someone who's seen that. But I know we talked kind of before we started recording about moral injury. I hear that buzzword all too often. I'm kind of curious to hear for you, like, how do you define moral injury in your own words?
Yeah, so I struggle with a quality definition, but I've got a sense of the feeling, right? And I've definitely experienced it. And I see it as a coming to grips with things that contrast with your ethical or moral beliefs, right? Of the world and of who you are and what you are supposed to do inside it, right? To take that giant context idea and kind of pin it down to a general understanding, it's for me when I realized that everything I thought I knew about treating a patient or treating somebody or what I was supposed to succeed was faced with the reality of that I didn't have control of that. And that made me question some other things, because obviously I think in our world, like, having control and understanding something in a world that we live in that's so much uncertainty becomes this challenge. I think that's, to me, I think we all struggle in different ways, but that's a big part of it. There's also a spiritual factor, I think, that there's there as somebody who's jokingly, devoutly agnostic, right? So I definitely believe in a higher power. I just don't always believe in humanity's way of translating the higher power. And my ability to translate that is minimal at best as well. But I did grow up my dad's a minister. I grew up in the church, so I have that kind of background, right? Just to kind of paint this picture of how I'm feeling. And so it made me kind of question, like, okay, what is in my control, and why am I so uncomfortable with the lack and loss of that?
Oh man, that's deep. I love it. We're definitely we'll kind of go down some of the spiritual rabbit holes and faith and belief and all that stuff, and like how critical it can be to be an anchor for people. But like right now, like definition of moral injury, I love it. It's like it's an internal conflict.
Yeah,
my moral injury is not the same as your moral injury. Like I can't, and that's the thing, is defining it as this blanket statement is wicked hard. And I think for all our listeners out there, understanding that, hey, what affects you deeply may not affect me deeply, and vice versa, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay.
Yeah, and I think it's also a good point to take a point and say it's not the same as post-traumatic stress. it is often related to traumatic events, but it's not necessarily the same as post-traumatic stress.
Right.
And I think that's why you hear this buzzword, because we're trying to get better at putting the right language to things.
Yep.
Because if you can't define something, you don't actually know it, right? And if you can't communicate a problem, then you don't actually know what the problem is.
100%. Yeah, no, I love that. And two, it's like, for me, for like thinking about when I was a junior medic, the what if conundrum. I think when you find yourself asking what if, like that's where you start realizing you're struggling with moral injury, an unhealthy level of moral injury, because you don't have the tools to manage the what if. And to be fair, I like to be fair. To be fair, for my Letterkenny friends out there, that's a Texas size 10-4, good buddy. Defining like what you recognizing, okay, that what if is I went through an event, I wasn't super pleased with the outcome. There's a healthy dose of what ifing where you're doing good reflection in AR, where you see that real moral injury issue where you start seeing people doing self harm or abusing substances, et cetera, is where like I personally think it crosses that threshold. So like for your experiences, you got a pretty vast career, just like myself. So like when you were hit, like when at what threshold in your career did you realize that, or did you ever have that unhealthy what if phase?
Yeah. So, admittedly, my wife spotted it, eons before I did, right? And then I was the terrible human who was convinced that she was wrong and I was right, right?
Yep.
And I've learned eventually in life that 8 times out of 10, hopefully you're not listening, Jess.
We won't send her the link.
She is right.
Yep.
And I am wrong, because what I've realized is I'm amazing at analyzing, understanding, and assessing others. And my proprioception and my internal assessment is not always accurate. So I say that to say I probably was experiencing moral injury as early on as first or second deployment.
Yep.
And I didn't really fully understand any of it until at the end of my career, where I had to do 3 1/60th stints at 2 different traumatic brain health and polytrauma rehab centers.
Yeah.
I have to be very clear about that, because we've all been to rehab centers, or many of us have, and there's different types.
Yep.
So luckily enough, I wasn't in like any other substance rehabs, although I definitely used alcohol as a sleep aid more often than I should have.
Yep.
But luckily enough, I haven't struggled with that. But I did struggle with this concept. I wouldn't say it's self-harm or even full-on suicidal ideations, but instead it was suicide by lack of living, if that makes sense. Right.
So if I not feeling alive.
Yeah.
Not being present.
Yeah. Not being present, number one. Right. But also not just not living life in an enjoyment. I just kind of gave up the idea of enjoying life. I wanted to survive at best.
Yep.
And even that, some days I was like, well, if I survive, I survive. If I don't, I don't. Right. And that's, I think, a resonance that as I've talked to a lot of people, I think that resonates as much, if not more so, than suicide ideations.
I think to be fair, honestly, it's a precursor to the ideations. Like my own personal struggles have been deep and well-rounded, or diverse, but for those who are well adjusted at the front end, having that, it's not necessarily you lose the will to live, you just you lose the passion. And
yes,
I felt like I've been in the same boat where I felt like something I used to enjoy, I'm just I feel like I'm going through the motions to do it.
Yeah, life is just becomes this thing you do, not the thing that you are or thing that you enjoy, right? And it also even manifested in weird ways where I think I probably experienced it this way, but I also definitely have memories in it this way, where life in memory became sepia toned at best, right? The color just kind of was sucked out of life.
That's fucking deep, man.
Right? And the most monumentous moment of that was when I was at Walter Reed for my first 3-month stint, and realized I was seeing in diplopia, which was shocker, right?
So diplopia, for our lay listeners, is double vision, which I also have.
Right, but I was really kind of embarrassed when I realized when the docs told me that, because I'm here I am, a medical provider in many senses, right? And I didn't even recognize that that's what I was seeing, right? And people would ask me oh, do you see in double vision? And I'm no.
Well, so let me ask you this, because this is how I didn't have it. It took me don't know how many flight physicals I went through before I figured it out, because the line between the notes is way up here and it's supposed to be through the middle.
Yeah.
Like, did you find yourself adjusting your MVGs like crazy?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
and just and I was adjusting my shot picture to a point where, looking back, I have to kind of talk about moral injury. I have to kind of question whether or not I should have been operational at times, right? So that I think that's really what I really hit, because when I came out of the doc, had told me I had diplopia. Okay, cool. And then when he gave me glasses and I could see for the first time, I walked out of the optometrist. It was a neuro optometrist. He put a bunch of prisms and a bunch of other things in my glasses. And I actually had binasal ocular occlusion, which is basically they just put electrical tape on the insides of my glasses to take, so that I could no longer have to see my inner peripheral, so that it would reduce headaches. But anyway, so I put these on and I walk outside. I immediately just start crying, like true weeping tears. And I called my wife and I was like, I forgot what trees look like until today. And I see this like true greens, and I see colors, and I see vibrance, and I wept for the loss of that, but I also was weeping because I was like, how much has my wife had to suffer in watching me fade away? Right. While listening to me be not just adamant, but aggressively and impolitely adamant that I wasn't fading away. And that she was the crazy one, and she couldn't see that. Right. And so that was a huge, talk about a moral injury. Like I felt like I had not only lost myself, but I had harmed others in such. And I'd also probably, in some ways, luckily it never happened, right, but endangered the ones that I was out to protect and work with. Because if I'm doing minor surgery and I'm doing surgical strikes, not to the level of a tier 1, but just a still relatively surgical strike. We're not a full blunt force in special operations, and I'm doing that where my eyes can't even see right, let alone is my thinking straight. And I base a lot of who I am, on this ability to analyze and assess and do things accurately. And so now here I am having to come to grips with, I wasn't even seeing the world properly. How was I analyzing what I was doing properly?
That's like talk about like the foundation of moral injury. Because then you start going back, like, what were the things that I kind of screwed up that I may have not screwed up had I been. So question, so since your wife was calling on you, were any of your teammates, did them see it, or?
So I don't know. I believe so, right? I don't think I was in the headspace to listen. Right. And I think that, unfortunately, successes, and many different successes in that process, were hiding it. And they just didn't necessarily also want to hurt me. So I think in some ways they were protecting me in their minds, right? And I applaud them for that. Actually, Jen Gurney, if you're listening, I still owe you a great thank you for just the patience that she and many others showed me when I was in those moments of, I'd be lucid for a while and then I wasn't as lucid and I didn't notice it. And I'm like, adamant that I'm with it. You're fine. And just many other people, but she's just one of the people that I've noticed that didn't know me from Adam, and put up with that. And I just go, wow, like, so I have to assess if she saw it. My brethren had to have, right? So,
well, to be fair, like another thing, to be fair, like we are so good, because my incident that caused me to leave my previous unit was like, we are incredibly good at masking and hiding when we're struggling with someone, and we're high performers and we still achieve because like you can, like, I'm not saying we're like these superhuman people, but like the people in like special operations seem to be able to like achieve levels that are almost unworldly, which this is why I work for the THF, the Honor Foundation, helping our friends find their journey after life. After this mission's finished. There you go. There's the plug for THF. But now I completely lost my train of thought. That's cool. Oh yeah, masking. Like, yeah, and then you bring up your wife calling you on the stuff. And it's like, so it's these people that we feel the most comfortable around that we let our guard down. They get to see our genuine self, but then we still like, nah, I'm fine.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, what's happening is I'm taking all the energy to put the mask on,
bro.
which we don't recognize while we're doing it because
Yes.
it's become so natural, right? So I'm taking all that energy in that, and then when I get home, I'm ripping that mask off, and in some ways that's a sign of love because I trust you so much that I'll peel this mask off. And I had masks on masks, like you know, I think Nyko doing the mask, you know, art project, and a lot of other people do it now too. And I encourage people, even if you don't go to Nyko, do a mask project of yourself. Even if you don't make a mask, like think about what that looks like and what energy you've put into making that.
Right.
And then I ripped it off, and now she's dealing with it, which is great that she gets to see who I really am. But what she also doesn't get then is like all the energy that I give everyone else. So you know, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. Because like actually, we had one of the stories we tell in our THF cohorts is about one of the fellows who empathy was his number one Clifton strength, and his wife was like, "No way, no way in hell," blah 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 blah. But then like his teammates were like, "Yeah, dude, he's the nicest guy at work." But that's the problem. Is like we literally leave it all at the office, and then we get home and we're exhausted because like big population that listens to this is first responders, which like, I don't think we give, and first responders need to give themselves some grace on the moral injury aspect because military deployed, like I go back to the barracks room and I don't have to deal with anything. Like you come off that worst shift of your life, you're expected to go home and be in the green.
Dude, I don't know, like I have a lot of you know, law enforcement and just first responders, the whole fire department especially, that are always like, oh John, like, you know, what you did is so great. And I'm like, guys, maybe I did okay, but like you guys do this and then you have to go eat dinner with your family.
Yes.
Right? And pretend like everything's cool. And not only that, but the people you just dealt with are in your neighborhood.
Right. Like
right?
They're in your community.
So, you know, that's a whole nother tough scenario to deal with that I imagine is just struggling. And I love that the world loves soldiers right now and we treat them all like heroes, and many of them are.
Yep.
But in that we've almost unheroed the first responder crew. So just shout out to you guys. Just my hat's off, literally to you guys. But yeah, so you deal with that, right? And then I think it's another struggle is you talked about like the what ifs, right? So I remember at patient 500, and I remember just feeling like godlike's not the right word, but it is in a sense where like you're overly proud of like look at this, I've treated these 500 people and nobody's died on me yet, you know. And then like 501, 505, I don't know, somewhere in there, patients come in, and I start to think about it, and I'm like, wait a second, all right, so this person was, you know, shot. They have a severed artery of some sort. Maybe it's not massive, but either way, so many of them had been laying in the dirt, trying not to die for hours. Right? Like we're talking, like they don't have NVG. So if the YPG, you know, gets shot, you know, for those that don't know, it's Kurdish foreign fighters that were our partner force in Syria. So if those guys get shot in the evening at like 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, well, now they're just laying there until their buddies can get them in the morning, right? And so then I realized, okay, you did that, and then you got in a bongo truck or a Hilux or whatever, and bounced around, you know, as fast as possible to me, and then I treat you. So by all means, like what I did, like did I really do anything? Is, you know?
Well, and I think that's an amazing thing too. Like for speaking of moral injury, like I've had plenty of casualties, like non-survivable. Period. They were dead when I got them, and like I've had those that survived all odds. Like there's really only been one casualty in my entire career that there was a what if moment that I could have affected. And I think that was important for me to recognize and realize. But too, it's like when we, as responders, like I think especially in healthcare as a whole, like we do a lot of interventions. We train on a lot of interventions. We train on a lot of procedures. But there's just no matter what I do, they're going to live, and no matter what I do, they're going to die.
Yep, and then 5% of them, right, is the, and it's statistics are like just great lies, right? So I'm just saying 5% just to kind of get a concept, and 5% of them are the 5% that you could actually affect.
Right.
The problem is you don't get to know which 5%.
100%.
So you have to treat 100% of them as if they're the 5%.
Right.
And then what that did, though, is it freed me for a second to take a deep breath. It gave me some other moral injuries probably too, but it gave me a second to kind of take a deep breath and go, okay, you know what? Like, if that's the case, then also the ones that I saved, is that really, did I really save them?
Right.
Right. So it kind of made me take a whole look at like, at the way that I thought about medicine in the pre-hospital world.
So that's like you brought up a point that triggered a thought that's kind of separate from the moral injury thing. It's like I've always lived my life and a career. It's like I don't care if the patient gets the role two, which for us that's like your first hospital in the continuum of care in military medicine. I don't care if the patient gets the role two alive. Like I want to know how fast they walk out of the United States based hospital under their own power.
Yep.
And I think that's when we start looking at medicine. What we can truly affect is not so much life saving, but it's that quality of life after the fact.
Hands down.
And I think too, like getting guys to understand that, because so many people place emphasis on life and death. It's like, all right, now let's measure with a better metric of how is this person doing now?
Yes. And what's that quality of life look like,
Yep.
right? That doesn't mean you don't treat ones that you don't think are going to make it, right? There are some expectant casualty care kind of things, and that's been a big conversation over the last 2 weeks. I mean, it's been a long conversation for a long time, but over the last 2 weeks, it's been really big in my life. At the Mass Cow Symposium that Missy Givens put on, at this here at the MSIS, there's been several talks about it, and I love that we're thinking about and talking about it. But as a whole, it's just exactly it's there are patients that are going to make it, but their quality of life may be rough,
right?
And it's so then you start getting in that moral injury of like, should I have, like, even my successes sometimes are struggles, like should I have saved, did I do the right thing, you know? And what I've come to grips with is, did I do the right thing with the information that I had at the time?
Perfect. Yeah.
And with the tools that I had, and do I recognize that the environment has a say? So like I call it the environmental pathology kind of, right? And the operation has a say in whether that be the mission that I'm on in, you know, in Syria or in Iraq or whatever, or that be a fire or structure fire or structure collapse, whether it be a, you know, you're a law enforcement and you come up on a patient, like, and you do what you can, right? But the mission and what you're trying to get done and who you're trying to save as well, and all matters. And that all has a say, and it's not just the medical portion.
Right. And I think that's another thing too, is I see a lot of people, and I've had discussions with people, like, if I knew a little bit more, I'm like, well, mate, you didn't know a little bit more, so stop focusing on what you don't know, focus on what you do know and did know in the incident, and do you feel like you did your best? And if you don't feel like you did your best, let's have a discussion, and we're going to show you did.
Yeah, and also show you, like, okay, cool, like, then let's learn from that, you know, and share that story, and let's find ways that we could have improved you. Maybe that's, we just need to empower you better. Maybe that's we needed a different piece of equipment that we didn't realize. Maybe that's we changed the way that we train, and also just start adding in training events where the patient seems like it should survive, and the medic or the responder of any sort does what he or she is supposed to do, and unfortunately the patient still dies, right, or still doesn't have a good quality of life, or loses a limb, and show that, like, that just happens, and it's okay. It's not okay to fail per se, right, due to like not planning or not doing the right thing when you can, but it is okay that you did as much as you could and somebody else had a say. And that made me review my successes as thoroughly and critically as I viewed my failures. You know, and I think Annie Dukes talks about this in Thinking of Bets, or in Bets, right? And she talks about, like, nothing is a zero sum. And she jokes about, like, how poker players will, like, if they win a hand, they'll talk about how well they played that hand. But if they lose a hand, well, it's like, oh, it's statistics, or it's this, or that, like, and it's like, no, like, your win was just as reliant upon all of those factors too.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think as you do that, you start to go, okay, I can control what I can control, and then it's about digging into the data. And I think the data will help us get over some of this moral injury, because I think the moral injury, what it really boils down to is uncertainty. I'm uncertain that I did everything I could have.
Yes, 100%.
And we're all uncomfortable with uncertainty, yet we all live in constant, right? It's, you know, Harvard talks about VUCA. It's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments. We live that, and then with a couple extra add-ons, like we're also threat-induced and time-sensitive. So now you've got, like, some new, like, other complex, you know, concepts, and it's really just trying to change. So in those moments, you just have a lot going against you. So let's celebrate our wins
Mm-hmm.
and even celebrate some of our failures in a sense, if that makes sense.
No, like to be fair, damn it. One of these days I'll break that habit. Not today though.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah, tomorrow. So that's a tomorrow problem. Well, like, and one thing that my when I worked with the 160th, like, that's the Army Special Operations Aviation Unit, black helicopters that annoyingly fly over your house super low in case you're around us. My bad. We would run a 45-minute lane and then debrief it for like 3 to 4 hours. It
Yes.
was obnoxious, but
Yep.
like it was the level of detail that we expected, and it was this like stringent, like train hard, fight hard, like train hard, fight hard. Like people love hard, realistic training. In my opinion, like the harder, the more realistic the training is, the less likely you're going to suffer from a moral injury because you did everything you could leading up to the event.
Yep.
And then while you're in the event, like we did pretty in-depth AARs, and of course you're like trying to do memory recall. Like that's, hey, for all my law enforcement friends, like I would give my left arm to have a body camera to go back and watch all my critical incidents so I could debrief myself like I needed to, because I'm trying to do recall after a 24-hour mission, and you're like, no, now to get this documented.
Yeah. Well, and I think that also speaks to the moral injury, because I want to leave people with a little bit of like what they can do next as they're struggling with this, right? And like, so when you think about that, realize that your memory of the events aren't as clear as you think they are.
100%.
Like you may also be seeing it, in sepia tone,
Yep.
yeah, like in those memories.
Yep.
And so you're blaming yourself for things that you may have actually did right, that you just in your head you haven't, because you're trying to come to grips with why didn't this not happen?
Right.
Like why did like I do everything I was supposed to do and it failed, or maybe you did everything but something, but did that one thing really change the outcome? And there's honestly no real way of knowing, but what you can do is go back and look and go, okay, I've done what I can. So I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is like finding the beauty of life and the joy of life is also important.
So yeah,
having like whether like I think most of us in law enforcement, just first responder and SOF, I kind of lump all those together. Apologize if somebody doesn't like that. I'm kind of, but not really. But we all kind of lumped in the same kind of people, and most of us are warrior poets or warrior artists,
right.
And then our lifestyle gets rid of that. And I encourage, especially as you're getting to the end of your career, but even in your career, to re-engage that and to try to embrace art and expression and a way of communicating all the things you're struggling in.
Yeah, that's ironic that you say that. As I snap a couple of flicks of the sun setting over the Potomac right now. You won't get the video feed, but we'll go ahead and drop some pictures during this chat so you can at least get the view that we've been looking at. And not the chat, the cast here, whatever the cool kids are calling these days. But you mentioned as we were doing some pre-work on this, like that you have a poem that you've written.
Yeah.
And then too, like I think that's like, as we're kind of mainly we're the cigars are almost burned to the nub. Like
yeah, we're getting them close.
Yeah, focusing on like how do you look at that inner, like the warrior artist, the spiritualityness, like for me personally, I'm also pretty viciously agnostic, but I definitely believe in there's something bigger than myself, because if you don't, like I find the people that have some of the biggest struggles are like they think that they're at this level and it's like, hey, there's nothing else. And so
yeah, becoming a very nihilist can be dangerous, I think. Like, and I'm not knocking anybody who is. Like, if you're a nihilist, that's okay. Like, I'm not here to judge who's right and who's wrong. But what I'm saying is, if you don't believe in something higher than you, even if it's just the purpose of the community or the purpose of the mission, like you got into this job because you believed in humanity and because you believed in something bigger than yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't do what you do.
Yeah,
we don't get paid well enough to have that be the driving factor, right? But yeah, so like I'll just read the poem and I'll talk about like what it means to me. So friendships, passing in the night, medical marauders, staving treasure chests, saving a life, less ordinary, whose halls are never light. We talk about nights that we sat and cried in these hallowed halls, hollowed and haunted from all the calls we should have made, and the times we should have stayed at home. Either way, one family's on their own. So to me, that's like I like plays on words, but also just it really speaks to my experience, right? So these friend ships, like maybe it's a boat, for my Navy brethren, right? Maybe that's an aircraft, maybe that's whatever it is, but it's what takes me to that next land to do things that I do to hopefully make America better and to save the American way of life, right? But there I am, like a medical marauder, right? And shout out to Mike Remley for coining that phrase, right?
Yes,
But
sir.
I'm there to kind of like to rob, cheat, and steal in order to make sure that that I do my medical job as best as possible, right? Because I'm rob, cheating, and stealing life, or or the Grim Reaper, if you
Yeah,
will, to save lives.
there's that picture, the stereotypical, where like the medic is standing over the patient while the angel of death is swooping down and he's essentially giving him the middle finger. Like that's it hits.
Exactly.
It hits.
Right. And then I'm staving a treasure chest. So staving is like to break in inside something, right? But that chest, right? That chest it is actually someone's chest, and I'm
literally,
right, and I'm literally letting out, the air or whatever. Like, not that most patients really need a needle D, but that's a whole nother story,
we'll
right?
talk about that
But
later.
like, and in order to save that life, but not just that life, but a life less ordinary, which by definition it's not the silly movie, which sure feel free to watch it, but it's really about choosing a life. We've all chosen a life that's less ordinary for the pursuit of something greater than us.
Right.
And those hauls that we bring in, that treasure that we bring in, is also the same as our like burden that we carry. So now we're carrying around these everywhere we go. We're carrying that heavy burden of success.
Right.
And they're not light. And then there's those conversations that you and I have had, that many of us have had in these, and we feel like this imposter syndrome, and we only share them in these dark halls, but we do them in these hallowed places that we find sacred. But then we don't do that in a place that we don't feel sacred, because we feel like we're not allowed to. Like, we don't allow ourselves to feel that,
Right.
right? And then we don't admit to ourselves or to others or to our real true loved ones how much it really affects us. So they don't, like you mentioned, oh, my husband's not empathetic. Like, no, we have so much empathy and sympathy, but like, we have purposely blunted it so that it doesn't stop us from doing what we can do.
Right.
And then it also, at the end there, when I'm talking about like either way, one family's on their own. So in order to protect my brethren, my family, I had to then leave my family.
Right.
And no matter what, like and I always felt that pull of like, oh, I have to go. My wife's like, John, like, do you really think that you're the only one that can keep your team alive?
Right.
And in a lot of ways, I did feel that way. But I had to kind of eventually come to grips with, well, that somebody else has got to take care of him. I've got to eventually leave, right? And I also had to realize that what I was doing is, in some ways, I had to struggle with the fact that I was leaving my family at home. And then when I did come home, I was still a shell.
Right. Yeah, you're still,
right. So I'm not even there then. And so then it's like, okay, well, what do they get of me?
Right. Yeah, man.
So if you can't bring yourself to handle your moral injury and to try to repair yourself for yourself, I get it, because self-care is tough for us.
Yes.
Then do it for your loved ones, whoever that be, your child, your wife. I really try to do it for my wife and for my daughter. I fail all the time, but like, I'm still trying, because it's like I owe it to them as much as I owed it, more than I owed it to my brethren,
Right.
who eventually could have somebody else. My family doesn't get another dad. They don't get another husband.
Right.
That you can get another medic or another, first responder eventually.
We're all replaceable.
So like, I think that's kind of, to me, but getting into those poems and just digging into and giving a language to how I was feeling made it so that I was like, oh, okay, that's what's affecting me.
Right.
And I think that's what's helped me heal some of the moral injury, and go on that path, but also just connect with art and life, and be like, you know what, life is beautiful.
Yeah.
And what am I doing if I can't show my patients what good life looks like? Then what am I saving them for anyway?
Right. That's deep, man.
So yeah, sorry, that was.
No, I love it. Freaking awesome. Actually, the last line of your poem, like, I like the way you phrased it, and then too, like, so I had an experience where, like, there's a family without, like, their own or whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry, paraphrasing.
Yeah,
but, like,
good.
I had an experience with. This was a super unique experience that was really weird. Like, I had a Kazvac, a ranger, unfortunately, like, had non-survivable injuries. in theater, we do the dignified transfer. I'm standing in the doorway, blocking the wind, trying to keep the flag from the body bag flying off while his squad mates are sitting there. I'm like just watching this. We do the dignified transfer on the ramp to the morgue. Then we do the dignified transfer, the ramp ceremony onto the C-17, the transfer case. Do the memorial downrange. But the way our unit was, like, it was at the end of this battalion's deployment. We all got home. I happened to redeploy the same time they did, so I got to go to the memorial ceremony on Fort Lewis and have the parents of this young ranger say, "Thank you for trying your best," and then also having his wife eulogize him, and like hearing his 2 or 3 year old son at the time, like just breaking down. It's like, while it was incredibly emotionally draining, like it was a full like continuum of the memorializing process. And like looking back on it, it's a core memory that I've had to struggle with. It created such a massive moral injury, because to be fair, like to be fair, I didn't really agree with what we did that night. It was not wrong. Let me get that clear as day. It was not wrong. I was like,
So. Yeah, it's tough because like every mission is important. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on it. 100%. But it feels less important sometimes when you're faced with the fact that somebody had to give up for that.
Right.
And so just remember, and remember too that most of the time the people you're dealing with, they wanted that mission to go as well.
Yep.
Right. 100%. So they kind of knew what they were getting into. That doesn't make it right, but just helps kind of understand it. And to your point of like all these things, the other thing you made me think of is I try to remember and remind everybody that planning for the worst is okay. Yep. We do it in so many other ways, but so that to all the guys in missions, bring a body bag on missions. Don't listen to some of the guys who are like, oh, that's a bad omen, things like that. Because you talk about dignified transfer, and I think of like moments where I've had to put people in trash bags.
There's a moral injury,
right? Because I listened to this voice that said, "Oh, I don't want to make people feel like I don't think I'm going to do what I'm doing." Right? And the superstition, and then now this person has to have their end moment, right? Yeah. And that person doesn't know that,
right?
Probably,
but you do.
But I do,
yep.
Right? And the people around me do. And if you can't save them, then give them a dignified moment.
100%.
Right?
Yep.
So have that body bag, have a flag of their country, or something that means something to them or to you, as a unit, or as a group of people that can say we're taking care of you at all costs, as much as we can, and even when it's not working out right, we're still here for you.
Yep, 100%. Like every night we had unfortunately we had the human remains bags, and like I had 3 flags because I have 3 kids on myself at all times. But I always carried one of the flags, was always designed to go over in case we had to. And by now, like now that I'm out, like during my retirement, it was awesome passing the torch and like helped me with my moral injury and struggles. Like I put those flags with the certificates from the first 2 we flew on September 11th in 2017, and I was able to essentially pass the proverbial torch to my kids to pay it forward to the next generation. And it's just that super meaningful thing. So like, and literally as we're sitting here watching the sunset, hey JJ, I'm gonna throw it to you. Like, you got any closing comments before the sun literally sets on this podcast?
So I'll end it with I did a similar thing with the flag, and the way that I ended my career, and kind of did it. So I carried the same flag every deployment, flew at every deployment. And I remember one time that like I was getting ready to try to hand sew. It was going to be poorly done, but hand sew it back together.
Yep.
And I had a great team sergeant who's like, John, like I love and applaud what you're doing, but no, how about you just leave the tatters?
Yes.
And as a memory of all the things that you've done.
Yep.
And so I did. And then what I did is I was blessed to be able to go to Station Foundation. Great chance, great organization if you guys ever want to look them up. And I went off with my daughter, and we summited one of the mountains, and we flew the flag there.
Oh, that's so cool.
And then when we got back, when I retired, I set it up. So we go to Disney pretty much every time I get back from deployment. It's my wife's way of allowing me to like reconnect with my family.
Yeah.
And so I got them to fly the flag there at Disney.
Oh, that's so cool.
And now it's retired. And I just told my family, like, listen, the last 20 years, has been a sacrifice for both of us, or all of us, right? But now the flag is up. I've done everything I can for the country. It's time to pass that baton.
Yes, sir.
And now the next 20 years, hopefully longer, right? But
Yep.
next 20 years, it will be dedicated to put the same efforts to be a better human, a
Yep.
better husband, and a better father. And that's what's helped my moral injury is being better for them, and thus being better for myself.
Yeah, that's super deep, man. Well, I want to say thank you for coming on and being vulnerable. Like, that's awesome. Like, it's one of the most like liberating things to be able to be comfortably vulnerable.
Yeah.
So definitely appreciate you come on. I definitely would like to have a chat with you about like some of the things we can do training wise as well. But again, John Johnson, like, speaks for himself. So thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.